In Module 2, Lesson 7, we're going to continue our work with kilograms and grams. And this time we're going to focus on um, using scales and reading scales. And that's going to help us as we move forward. And it's going to help us when we start to solve word problems, because sometimes they'll give you a picture of a scale rather than tell you the exact weight that something is. So let's take a look at what that can look like. This video is probably going to be pretty short because most of the work that we're going to do today in class is about estimating how much things weigh in grams and kilograms. And so we'll review a little bit of that here, but the hands-on portion of this, or not hands-on necessarily, but the process of going through and sort of figuring out and getting a reference for what a kilogram is, what a gram is, that's sort of the basis of this lesson. And we're going to do a lot of that work in person in class, and that's sort of the most important part. So let's go ahead and look at what a scale might look like, though. So you might have one. Looks like this. You'd have something to actually weigh it up here, with the dial, or the part that showed the weight, would look like this. And then it would look almost like a clock. And you might have 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and this could also be one. It can be 0 and it can be 100. And this is going to be in, we'll say this is in kilograms. So it always tells you what the weight is, grams or kilograms. This is also going to have marks like this. I'll do it in a different color. Make it really different so it's easy to see. It'll have sort of halfway marks between each one most of the time. So in this case, since we're counting by tens, the halfway marks would be the 5s. And then it's also going to have, let's find another really different color here. You'll have little marks in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. And I'm going to stop there. But you imagine that going all the way around, right? I'll spare you sitting here watching me draw little lines the entire time. And then you're going to have a portion like an arrow that's going to point to something. So for example, this might start here, and maybe this thing weighs that many kilograms, right? And so this part becomes a little bit like reading a clock. So you're going to say it weighs 10, 15, we're not up to 20, it's less than 20. So 10, 15, 16, 17, it weighs 17 kilograms, right? And so that is how you'd read a mass or a weight when you're given a clock or a dial that looks like this. And so the key point is to find the halfway marks. Sometimes they're usually not in different colors. So let me sort of draw a zoomed in look of what it would be. Like you'll usually have something that's like 10, 20, and then you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's usually not a different color. It's usually just bigger. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the halfway point is usually just a bigger line, and then your arrow might point somewhere like that, and then you'd know 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. Or to make it even more similar to the one we just did, it could be 17. So 10. You don't have to count all these individual ones because you know that that's the 15. That's the 5 mark. So 10, 15, and then count on from there, 16, 17. So like this over here on the right is kind of like a zoomed in picture of what we had on the left. We had the whole thing. And so that is an important part of today's lesson. It doesn't take up a lot of or maybe even any of the problem set or the homework, but it's something that I want you to take away from this lesson because I know that it's a skill that you're going to need moving forward. It's a skill that is going to come up. You are going to have to weigh, or not weigh, but measure weights and masses using this. You're going to have to be able to identify a weight based on a scale and then use it in word problems. So I want to make sure that you have that skill so that you know what numbers to use when you move on to word problems. Sometimes they'll do it digitally. So sometimes they would just tell you that it's 17 kilograms. But I also want to make sure you have this skill. Think of this like a digital clock, and that, oops, that's a bad arrow. That's like an analog clock. And so it's great if you can, figure out the digital one really easily, but you still need to be able to read the analog one, just like we talked about with time. From there, we'll get into some word problems here in the next couple of lessons. They touch on it a little bit in this lesson as well. Um, but for the most part, we're working on reading scales. And then we're working on, like I said in class, we'll be talking about what is 1 kilogram, what is 1 gram, what is 100 grams. And a big part of our work there is sort of giving you an idea or a reference point for what those are. So 1 kilogram probably doesn't mean much to you, but if you can start to think to yourself like, oh, 1 kilogram kind of is like a full water bottle. That weighs about as much as a full water bottle. That's going to help you understand when we move forward with word problems, like, are your answers reasonable or are they not reasonable? So if I say like a gram weighs like, the same as a paper clip, you can start to wrap your brain around, well, I'm not going to measure a horse in grams because that would be such a huge number. It would be easier for me to measure a horse in kilograms because that number it would give me a much smaller number. On the same side, you're not going to measure a feather in kilograms because the number would be so small, it would make much more sense to measure it in grams. So we want to, just like we talked about with time, we want to make sure that our answers are reasonable. And in order to make sure that they're reasonable, we need to go through the process of making sure we understand what a kilogram is, what a gram is, what a group of 10 grams or a group of 100 grams, what those are similar to, so that we are able to look at an answer and decide, is that something that's reasonable? Does that make sense? Because as we've talked about a lot in class, that's a huge part of our math work this year, is being able to decide, does my answer make sense? And if it doesn't, going back and fixing something that might be wrong. That self-evaluation is a really important part. And like we talk about, double checking your work is always really important too. So we need to just get in good habits with that. And this sort of lesson with weights and masses is a really good reinforcement for that. Again, I know this was sort of a short video. We will talk a lot about this in class, and we'll go over a bunch of examples. You guys will generate a bunch of different ideas in terms of identifying different things that weigh, a kilogram or a gram or 10 grams or 100 grams. And we will talk about these scales as well, but this was just a little opportunity to review in case you missed that in class or needed a refresher. And we'll continue our work with this in the next couple of lessons.